I am a soldier in the United States Army. My unit was sent to the Everglades for survival training and swamp patrol exercises. The usual stuff. Maps, compasses, heavy backpacks, and many nights sleeping in mud with mosquitoes biting nonstop. Nothing new for us. We spent the first few days setting up a small outpost near an abandoned watchtower. It was a decaying wooden structure that, according to reports, had been out of use for decades. Still, it had electricity, so we set up security cameras around the perimeter. We installed them more as a formality than a necessity. The only dangers out here were alligators and the occasional wild boar. Or so we thought. Then, during the first week, one of the cameras captured something strange. The first appearance. "Hey, come look at this," said Parker, the guy in charge of monitoring the nighttime footage. I leaned over the screen, and I frowned. On the grainy, green-tinted image, we saw a man standing at the edge of the camp. He wasn't moving. He wasn't approaching, he was just there, watching. "Who the hell is that?" I muttered. Parker zoomed in. That's when we noticed the most terrifying part. His face wasn't visible. Not because it was blurry or pixelated, it was just not there. A smooth, featureless surface where his face should have been. "Must be a camera glitch," Parker muttered. But he didn't sound convinced. The stalker. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the image. So when my shift started, I made sure to check the perimeter carefully. I even went to the exact spot where he had appeared. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing. I was about to call it in as a false alarm when Parker's voice crackled over the radio. "He's back." I turned around so fast I nearly tripped, but there was no one there. "Are you sure?" "He's right in front of you, man. Check the tower camera." I sprinted back to base. When I got to the monitors, my blood ran cold. The faceless man was still there, and this time he was closer. Standing right at the border of the camp, motionless. As if waiting. Escalation. The following nights, it got worse. Every evening, like clockwork, he would appear, always standing closer than the night before. Some nights, he was captured by multiple cameras at the same time, in places impossible to reach that fast. But no one ever saw him in person, only on the recordings, until the night we finally found him. The encounter. We decided to expand our patrol area, heading toward the direction he always came from. The night was dense, the mist covering the ground like a layer of smoke. The swamp water reached our knees. The air was thick with humidity and the stench of decay. "Keep your eyes open," murmured Jackson, our sergeant. We moved carefully, rifles at the ready, flashlights cutting through the fog. Then he was there, not approaching and not walking, just standing in the middle of the mist, completely still, facing us. We froze. I felt every hair on my body stand on end. What the hell? We aimed our flashlights at him, and that's when we saw it clearly. He had no face, not a mask, not a covering. Just smooth, pale skin where his features should have been, like he was never meant to have a face. The impossible vanishing. "Identify yourself," Jackson barked. The thing didn't move, it just tilted its head slightly as if it were studying us. Then it was gone. It didn't run and it didn't fade away, it simply ceased to exist. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. I don't even remember who fired the first shot, and maybe it was Jackson. Maybe it was me. But once the first bullet was fired, we all opened fire. Into the mist. Into nothing. Because there was nothing left to shoot at. The last image. We ran back to base. None of us said a word, but the fear was written on our faces. Parker rewound the security footage. We wanted proof of what we had seen, but the footage showed nothing. Just us, standing in the empty swamp aiming our rifles at nothing. Final orders. At sunrise, Jackson made the call. "We're pulling out, immediately." We packed our gear in record time and started heading back to the nearest extraction point. We didn't look back. We didn't stop, and just before we left, Parker glanced at the tower camera one last time. He went pale. "Oh God." We all turned to the screen. There he was, standing on top of the watchtower, watching us leave, faceless. The aftermath. I've seen a lot of things in my service, and I've fought in real war zones. I've seen death up close, but nothing haunts me like that night. Now, whenever I see a security camera, I hesitate. Because deep down, I'm terrified that one day I'll see him again. Watching me. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is a place straight out of a dream. Endless hills, crystal clear rivers, and a constant mist that gives it a mystical aura. But hidden within that natural beauty, there is something else. Something that should have never been awakened. We were deployed in the Smoky Mountains for a reconnaissance mission. Reports of illegal activity had surfaced. Poachers, smugglers of protected species, or maybe something worse. We were a 6-man unit, trained for jungle and forest operations. Our mission was straightforward: patrol, investigate, and report anything suspicious. The first night was uneventful. We set up a small camp near a stream, established a watch rotation, and rested. Everything seemed normal, but by the second night things began to change. The cursed canteen. One of our men, Ramirez, found an old water canteen hidden among the bushes. It was covered in dust and mold, but when he shook it, water sloshed inside. "Looks like someone left this here a long time ago," he said, examining it. "Don't drink from that," I warned him. "It could be contaminated." Ramirez laughed and, ignoring my warning, took a long sip. "Tastes fine, I was thirsty. At the time, we didn't think much of it. We were all exhausted and focused on the mission. But a few hours later, Ramirez started acting strange. I was on night watch when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, rifle ready, but there was nothing. "Who's there?" I whispered. Silence. Just the sound of the wind and the mist drifting between the trees. A few minutes later, Ramirez walked out of his tent. His eyes darted around, scanning the darkness. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Don't you see them?" he whispered. "See who?" He leaned in and whispered in my ear. "They're watching us, they're in the trees." A chill ran down my spine. I raised my rifle and scanned the area. Nothing, but the way he said it. The pure terror in his eyes. It wasn't normal. The rest of the team woke up. One of them, Torres, tried to calm him down. "Brother, there's no one there, you're just tired." But Ramirez wasn't listening. He clutched his head, mumbling something incomprehensible. Then, without warning, he screamed and ran into the forest. "Ramirez!" We chased after him, flashlights slicing through the mist. But he vanished within seconds. We found him minutes later, shivering, his skin ice cold. He kept repeating the same phrase. "I shouldn't have drunk the water, I shouldn't have drunk the water." We brought him back to camp. His condition worsened overnight. He sweated profusely, his body convulsing as if in hypothermic shock. "We need to get him out of here," said Sergeant Ibarra. Before we could do anything, another soldier, Sandoval, picked up the canteen Ramirez had drunk from. He turned it in his hands, then whispered, "What the hell is this?" We shone our flashlights on the canteen. The water wasn't normal. In the light, it looked thick, almost gelatinous. Small, shadowy shapes floated inside, like they were alive. "No one else touches this," ordered the sergeant, but it was already too late. Ramirez's fate. At sunrise, Ramirez was dead. No signs of injury or struggle. Only his face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. Like he had seen something unimaginable in his final moments. Things get worse. After his death, everything unraveled. Torres started hearing voices. He swore someone was whispering his name from the trees. Sandoval woke up with deep scratches on his arms, unable to remember how he got them. Even I wasn't spared. I started seeing shadows moving between the trees. At first I thought it was just exhaustion, until the impossible happened. I was standing guard when I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, expecting to see nothing, but when I looked down, there were fresh footprints in the dirt, right behind me. "We need to leave." Now Sergeant Ibarra didn't hesitate. We weren't waiting around to see what happened next. We packed up immediately. The second death. But while we were preparing to leave, Sandoval collapsed. His body convulsed violently, his skin turning gray. A thick black foam leaked from his mouth. We tried to help him, but then something impossible happened. His body arched backward, far beyond what human bones should allow. And then, he stopped moving. No pulse, too dead in less than 48 hours. The escape. We didn't waste another second. We left everything behind and ran for our lives. The journey back was a nightmare. The fog was thicker. The forest sounds were distorted, like something was speaking a language we couldn't understand. And the worst part? Every now and then, we all felt something watching us, something following us. We never saw it clearly, but we knew it was there. When we finally reached the rescue team, we could barely speak. They ran medical tests on us and they found nothing unusual. But we knew the truth. The real horror. Something in that forest didn't want us there. Something was hunting us. And it used the water as bait. We never spoke about it again. No official report was filed. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, in my dreams, I still see those shadowy shapes floating in the water, waiting for someone else to drink. If you had told me that my last mission in Great Smoky Mountains National Park would leave me with nightmares to this day, I never would have believed you. During my service, I earned the respect of my comrades for my tracking skills and ability to navigate the wilderness. I wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but I always found my way back. I always knew when something wasn't right in the forest. That's why when they assigned me to a long-term patrol mission in a remote station within the park, I didn't hesitate. It sounded simple. A rotation of watch duty for several months, making sure poachers and reckless hikers didn't get into trouble. Our outpost consisted of 6 men, including our sergeant. The station was an old reinforced wooden cabin, serving as our base of operations. Everything seemed routine, until the flag started folding itself. The first sign. The first time it happened was on the 3rd week. That morning was unusually cold and a thick mist covered the valley. When we stepped out of the cabin, we saw it. The flag we had left waving the night before was now neatly folded into a perfect triangular shape, resting at the base of the pole. "Who did this?" the sergeant asked, frowning. No one answered. We all looked at each other, waiting for someone to confess. But no one did. "Must have been the wind," one of the guys said, though we all knew that wasn't possible. That night, we secured the flag with extra knots, tying the ends tightly. The next morning, it was folded again. The watch begins. We tried to ignore it. We stuck to our routine. But every night, no matter what precautions we took, the flag would be folded perfectly by morning. Then the noises began. At first, it was barely audible. Soft footsteps outside the cabin during the dead of night. We would rush out with flashlights and rifles, but never found anyone. Only the lingering feeling that something was watching us from the trees. One night, Jimenez, one of our men, swore he saw someone standing by the flagpole. "It wasn't one of us," he muttered, pale. "It was tall, really tall, and it looked wrapped in something, like an old uniform." That was the first time someone said the word we were all avoiding. Ghost. Our sergeant, a hardened combat veteran, dismissed it, but after a week of sleepless nights, he ordered us to set up night watches in pairs. I was the first one assigned, the visitor. That night, rifle in hand, I watched the flagpole through the cabin window. The moon cast a dim glow over the hill. Everything was still, until I saw it. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't exactly a man, it wasn't a shadow. It moved stiffly, but it made no sound. Slowly, it bent down toward the flag. With precise, deliberate movements, it began folding it. I aimed my rifle, but my body froze and I couldn't move. A bone-chilling cold washed over me, and then the figure turned its head toward me. It had no eyes, just 2 empty sockets, dark and hollow. My body jerked back and I screamed. The rest of the men rushed out of the cabin, flashlights blazing. But by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. Only the perfectly folded flag remained. "We're leaving." That morning, the sergeant made the decision. "We're pulling out." No one protested. We packed our gear and left the station behind. Back at headquarters, we reported nothing. We said nothing. They would never believe us anyway. But I know what I saw. To this day, whenever I see a folded flag, I feel a shiver run down my spine. Because in that forest among the whispering trees, something still stands guard. Something still performs its duty. And maybe it always will. My name is Lieutenant Rios, and this is a story I wish I could forget. It was supposed to be a reconnaissance operation. Something simple, they told us. A series of disappearances in the area surrounding the national park had caught the attention of authorities. The strange part was that there were no patterns. Men, women, children, they all vanished into the wilderness without a trace. Our job was to patrol the area, look for any clues, and report any anomalies. We were assigned a small camp as our base of operations, a clearing in the forest with a couple of barracks and a bonfire in the center. Nothing fancy, but functional. From the first night, something felt off. Always at the same time. The first sign that something was wrong was the dogs. We had brought 4 trained German shepherds for detection and tracking. They were disciplined animals, used to combat situations. But every night, just before midnight, they would erupt into a frenzy of barking, all facing the same spot in the forest. The first time I thought they had detected an animal, maybe a bear or a cougar. I ordered one of the soldiers, Corporal Mendez, to check the area with his flashlight. Mendez, check that zone. He nodded and advanced cautiously, sweeping the trees with his beam of light. Nothing, Lieutenant, there's nothing here. But the dogs kept barking. Their bodies were tense, their snouts low, fur bristling. This wasn't normal behavior. Something was scaring them. The next night, the same thing happened. Same spot, same time. Then the next and the next. We are not alone. By the 5th night, my patience had run out. I took Sergeant Ortega and 2 other soldiers, and we headed into the woods with flashlights and rifles. No wind, only the crunch of leaves under our boots. Lieutenant, I don't like this, Ortega murmured. Just follow the protocol. Stay in formation. We walked for several minutes, reaching the exact spot where the dogs always barked. Nothing. Just trees, bushes, and the thick darkness of the forest. Or so we thought. One of the soldiers, Private Gomez, froze in place. Did you see that? See what? Something was there, something big. We aimed our flashlights, nothing, only shadows and branches. Don't joke around, Gomez. If you saw something, say it. His voice trembled. It was like a silhouette. Tall, very tall. But when I shined my light on it, it disappeared. Silence. A cold wind swept through the trees. Let's go back, I ordered. That night, the dogs didn't stop whimpering until dawn. The signal. After a week, we decided to set up night vision cameras. If something was out there, we were going to catch it on video. That night, we waited. Midnight came, and the dogs started barking. Mendez checked the monitor. Lieutenant. His voice broke. I walked over to the screen. There was something in the footage, something that wasn't there in person. A tall figure, thinner than a human, with elongated limbs and an oversized head. It was still staring at us from the edge of the forest. But when I looked toward the area with my own eyes, nothing was there. Then the radios began to crackle. A distorted noise, like someone speaking but with no discernible words. Mendez turned off the screen. Fuck this. The disappearance. The next morning, one of our soldiers was gone. His bed was untouched. No signs of struggle, no screams had been heard. He had just vanished. We searched for hours, nothing. Only his weapon lying in the mud, exactly in the spot where the dogs always barked. What I saw. That night was our last one in that place. The dogs didn't bark anymore. They whimpered, curled up on the ground. It was as if they had given up, as if they had accepted that whatever was out there had won. I didn't sleep. I kept my rifle close. I waited. At some point I heard footsteps, not inside the camp, but inside my head. And then I saw it. It stood there watching me from the entrance of my tent. Tall, thin, twisted. It had no face. I tried to scream, my voice didn't come out. When I woke up, it was already morning. Ortega was shaking me violently. Lieutenant, we're leaving. What happened? We got orders. The mission is over. Pack your gear. I didn't ask anything else. The silence. We returned to base without incident. No official report was given. The missing soldier was never found. But the worst part was this. When we checked the camera recordings, there was nothing. No figure, no barking, nothing. As if it had never happened. But I know the truth. I saw it, and every night when I close my eyes, I know it's still watching me. They told us it would be a training exercise. Jungle survival instruction and patrols through wooded terrain. A routine drill. A small group of soldiers, light equipment, radios with limited range. No air support or immediate backup. What they didn't tell us was what was waiting for us in those mountains. Is the camera ready? Asked Corporal Mitchell, holding his rifle in one hand while checking his gear. Ready, but I don't know why you want so many pictures of trees, replied Foster, our communications operator, holding his phone. To show my wife we're not on vacation, Mitchell joked as he adjusted his backpack. The forest was thick, an endless sea of towering trees and dense undergrowth. The air was heavy with humidity, and sunlight barely filtered through the canopy. We had been hiking for over 3 hours, and the feeling of isolation was suffocating. Lieutenant Richards ordered us to move in a dispersed formation. Nothing unusual, just a routine patrol. But after a few meters, Foster cursed under his breath. "What's wrong?" asked the lieutenant. Foster frowned as he looked at his phone screen. "I don't know. I think the camera's broken." "Let me see," Mitchell said, stepping closer. Foster showed him the photo he had just taken, an image of our camp, but something was wrong. Very wrong. Among us, between the tents and backpacks, there were blurry figures, shadowy outlines, as if something was standing among us. "What the hell is that?" Mitchell whispered, lowering his voice. "Do you guys see this too?" Foster asked, turning the phone toward the rest of us. I looked at the screen and my stomach clenched. They were human shapes, that much was certain, but they weren't soldiers. Their outlines were hazy, like they were made of smoke or mist. None of us had seen anything strange when Foster took the picture. "It's probably a lens error," I said, though my voice didn't sound as firm as I intended. Lieutenant Richards said nothing. He took the phone, examined the image, then handed it back to Foster. "Delete it." Foster hesitated for a second, but eventually obeyed. But the unease remained. We continued moving for several hours. The forest seemed to close in around us. No matter how much we walked, that sensation of being watched was impossible to shake. When night fell, we set up a makeshift camp. We lit a small fire and took turns standing guard. Then, in the middle of the night, they appeared again. I was on watch, rifle in hand, when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the trees. "Who's there?" I whispered, a chill running down my spine. Silence. I stood up slowly, rifle at the ready. Then, in the darkness, I saw it. A tall figure with thin limbs and a face covered in shadows. Its silhouette seemed to float, as if it didn't belong in this world. I swallowed hard and raised my voice. "Identify yourself." But the figure didn't respond. That was when Mitchell woke up. "What's going on?" He turned toward me, but then his expression changed. "What the hell is that?" I looked back, and the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked. Mitchell nodded slowly. "You weren't hallucinating. We woke the others." Lieutenant Richards tried to keep us calm, but we all saw the tension in his face. "We're not going to panic," he said. "It could be someone messing with us." No one replied. We knew there was no one else in these mountains. Foster took out his phone again and snapped a picture of the forest. His face went pale when he looked at the image. Silhouettes, dozens of them, standing among the trees, watching us. And this time their features were clearer. They looked like soldiers, but from another era. Old uniforms, blurred faces, translucent bodies. "We need to get out of here," I said, feeling my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Lieutenant Richards didn't argue. We packed up immediately and abandoned the camp before sunrise. We walked non-stop, but no matter how much we advanced, the forest seemed endless. "This doesn't make sense," Mitchell growled. "We should have been out of here hours ago." But we were still there, like the forest wasn't letting us leave. Then we heard the whispers. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" Foster nodded, his face ghostly white. The whispers came from everywhere. Soft voices speaking in a language we didn't recognize. "This isn't normal," Mitchell muttered. Lieutenant Richards tried to keep us together. "Keep moving, don't stop." But then the fog began to rise. It was dense, cold, and within it we saw the shadows move. Mitchell screamed when something brushed against his shoulder. A cold breath. We pointed our rifles, but there was nothing there. The shadows were circling us. Then we heard a voice. A deep, echoing voice coming from the fog. "You shouldn't be here." The cold intensified. Foster began praying under his breath. "Run," Lieutenant Richards whispered. And we ran. When we finally saw the road, we collapsed from relief. We left the forest like we had escaped hell itself. No one spoke until we arrived at the base. No one mentioned what we saw. Foster checked his phone. Every single photo was blurry. All of them. To this day, when I close my eyes, I still see those shadows among the trees. They warned us we shouldn't be there, and I think they're still watching us. My name is Lieutenant Ramirez. For years, I was part of a reconnaissance unit in Everglades National Park, Florida. I grew up in a neighborhood where violence was part of everyday life. So when I came of age, I enlisted. The army gave me discipline, a purpose. But I never imagined it would also make me face something beyond reason. This story is not for skeptics. If you don't believe me, I don't care. But those who have been in the jungle at night, those who have felt that eerie sensation of being watched even when nothing is in sight, they will know I speak the truth. It was a routine mission, patrolling the swampy area near the southern border of the park. My team consisted of 5 men: Sergeant Torres, a veteran with more scars than he could count; Corporal Mendez, always ready with a joke; Private First Class Vasquez, young but with good instincts; and Private Suarez, the quietest of the group but with impeccable aim. The heat was unbearable. The stench of rotting vegetation clung to our clothes, and the constant buzzing of mosquitoes was relentless. We had been walking for hours when the radio crackled with Commander Ortega's voice. "Jaguar unit, report your position." Sergeant Torres responded, advancing through the designated area, no sightings. But that wasn't true. Something had been following us. I first felt it as a pressure on my nape, that instinct I had learned never to ignore. Then I saw Vasquez quickly turning his head, as if he had seen something out of the corner of his eye. "Did you see that?" I asked in a low voice. "I don't know." Something moved among the trees. Mendez laughed. "Bah, it's just raccoons or a lost alligator." We kept moving, but then Torres raised his fist. We stopped immediately. "What is it, Sergeant?" Suarez whispered. Torres pointed toward the undergrowth. At first I saw nothing, but then... there they were. 2 red eyes shone between the trees. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They were just there. "Who's there?" Torres shouted, aiming his rifle. The eyes vanished. Not because they closed or moved away. They just stopped existing. "It's a reflection," Mendez said, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. But we all knew that wasn't true. We decided to keep moving. No one spoke, but the tension thickened. Every shadow seemed to shift. Sweat dripped from our faces, and not just from the heat. About an hour later, we reached a clearing where the water reached our ankles. We stopped to check maps and take a breath. Then we heard the first sound, the splash a few meters away. "It's just a gator," Vasquez muttered. Then another sound, this time right behind us. Torres signaled for silence. We heard breathing, heavy, deep. The eyes reappeared, this time closer, just a few meters away among the trees. "Mendez, light it up," Torres ordered. Mendez raised his tactical flashlight and pointed it in that direction. Nothing. But then, something laughed. It wasn't a human laugh, it was something low, guttural, like something trying to imitate a person's laughter. "We need to leave." Now Torres didn't have to say it twice. We moved out of there as fast as we could, staying close together. But every time I looked back, those eyes were still there. They were following us. They were hunting us. Then it happened. We were advancing when Vasquez, who was at the rear, let out a choked gasp. When we turned around, he was gone. Only his rifle remained half buried in the mud. "Vasquez!" I screamed, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. Panic took over the group. Torres tried to maintain order, but his hands were trembling. "We can't leave him," Suarez said. "We don't know what the hell that is, but we can't fight it," Torres replied. "We need to go." "No," I protested. "Vasquez is still here." Mendez looked at me with a pale, horrified face. "Where, man? Where do you see him?" But I did hear something, the voice of Vasquez. "Help me." The voice came from the darkness. "Vasquez!" I ran toward the sound, but Torres grabbed me. "Don't do it. It's him, damn it." Torres looked at me with terror-filled eyes. "That thing is trying to fool us." We had no choice. We ran like cowards, like prey. We dove into the jungle, running without direction, just getting away from those things. The journey back was endless. We didn't talk, we didn't sleep. We just walked until we saw the lights of the camp. When we arrived, Commander Ortega frowned. "Where is Vasquez?" No one answered. They sent out a search team with dogs, helicopters. They combed the area. They found nothing, no body, no footprints, just his rifle and tracks. Human tracks, but they were barefoot and massive. They ran psychological tests on us. We said Vasquez got lost in the jungle, that an alligator got him. We lied. But every night when I close my eyes, I still see those red eyes shining in the darkness. And sometimes, When the wind blows, I can still hear his voice. Help me. The cursed logbook in Olympic National Park. My name was buried in reports no one reads, in files forgotten by time. But my story, no matter how much they try to bury it, remains real. I was a soldier in the Mexican Army, sent on an exchange mission with U.S. forces in Olympic National Park in the northwest of Washington. What happened there should have never occurred. I want you to imagine the following: a night watch shift in one of the wettest and most isolated regions of the country, a night like any other. Only when you check the guard logbook, you find the name of a dead soldier, a comrade who perished months earlier on another mission. That is exactly what happened to us. But to understand it, I need to go back to where it all began. Olympic National Park is a wild beast. Its vastness swallows entire towns, with towering mountains and forests so dense that sunlight barely filters through. We had arrived as part of a collaboration program, training with American troops in tracking and jungle survival techniques. They told us it would be a routine mission. Our unit consisted of 6 Mexican soldiers, along with an American platoon. Among us, a seasoned sergeant stood out, a man everyone respected. No one spoke much in those first days. The humidity gnawed at our bones, and the smell of rotting wood clung to our skin like a second layer of flesh. We set up camp in a clearing near Crescent Lake, a body of water so dark it reflected the sky like a shattered mirror. From the very first night, we noticed something strange. The Americans avoided solo patrols. It wasn't fear, it was caution. "This place has stories," an American sergeant warned us while lighting a cigarette. "Hunters go missing, patrols see things in the woods." We laughed as soldiers do, but the air was heavy. And then one of our own disappeared. We had just finished a tracking exercise in the dense forest. Only 2 hours remained before nightfall when Soldier Vargas failed to return to the meeting point. At first, we thought he had taken the wrong route, but as the search stretched on for hours, we found nothing. At dawn, we conducted a more thorough search. We traced his last known location, but all we found was his rifle, carefully propped against a tree. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. Vargas's disappearance hit us like a punch to the gut. The Americans weren't as surprised. It was as if they were used to losing men in this damned forest. 2 nights later, something even worse happened. I was assigned night watch with another comrade. The routine was simple. 2 soldiers stood guard for 3 hours, then woke the next shift. It was a thick night with fog covering the ground like a blanket of corpses. That was when I decided to check the guard logbook, more out of habit than anything else. And there it was, Vargas's name. A chill ran down my spine. "Is this a joke?" I asked my companion. He, pale as a corpse, shook his head. "I didn't write that." We ran to wake the sergeant. When he arrived, he frowned as he reviewed the log. His battle-hardened eyes darkened even more. "Who else has access to this?" he asked. "No one. Only those on watch duty." Tension grew in the following days. No one talked about the logbook, but we all feared it. Vargas had disappeared, yet his name kept appearing on the night shifts, as if he was still patrolling with us. Until we saw him. It happened on a moonless night. I was on watch again when I heard footsteps in the undergrowth. I thought it was one of our own and called out softly. No answer. I aimed my rifle into the mist and saw him. Vargas stood there, just meters from the camp. He wore the same uniform he had on when he disappeared. His boots were clean. His face, vacant. "Vargas," I whispered. But he didn't respond. He just stood there, his head slightly tilted. Then he smiled. My heart stopped. It wasn't a normal smile. It looked foreign to his face, as if someone else was pulling his muscles into that grin. I took a step back and Vargas vanished into the fog. The next morning I reported it to the sergeant. I wasn't the only one who had seen him. 2 American soldiers had noticed the same thing. But instead of reacting with fear, the sergeant simply ordered us to pack. "We're leaving at dawn." He offered no explanation. The Americans didn't protest. Something in their faces told me they had seen this before. But the forest wouldn't let us go so easily. That last night, the noises began. They weren't animals. They were footsteps circling the camp. Sometimes a distant whisper calling our names. Our rifles were ready, our magazines full. No one slept. And when we finally saw the light of dawn, we understood we had survived by luck, not bravery. We returned to base in silence. Vargas never reappeared, but his name kept being written in the guard logbook. A few weeks later, I received a call from one of the American soldiers who had been with us. He told me that after we left, a new team took over guard duty at Olympic National Park. On their first night, they found a new name in the logbook, not Vargas's, but one of their own. A soldier who had died months earlier on another mission. The forest does not forget. The forest watches us.